Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today we're diving into some pretty deep geopolitical waters around US-China tensions. And the question, is China more democratic than the West?
That's a title that really makes you sit up and think. What's your take on this perspective?
Well, Chandra Nair's video, as you know, really explores these tensions from an Asian perspective. He argues that amidst all this global uncertainty and existential risks, China might actually have a clearer vision for a future world order. It's almost like, they believe in a sort of pragmatic clarity that the West sometimes seems to lack.
Interesting. So the idea is that China's approach could arguably be seen as more directed or visionary, even if the term democratic might traditionally be reserved for systems with free elections and such, right?
Exactly. It's like, on paper, we think of democracy in a very conventional way. But Nair points out that, well, the Western approach is under so much strain these days. The inherent fragmentation and chaotic narratives about the end of the American century seem to indicate that everything we relied on is becoming unglued.
Yeah. So, while the West struggles with its internal divisions, China's model might be seen as having more control or coherence in its long term planning, even if that control is exercised very differently.
Right. And think about it. It's like comparing two approaches, one that's experimental and often reactive, versus one that seems to be deeply rooted in a planned, top down vision. Nair suggests that China is fully aware of its role on the global stage, and perhaps that awareness gives it an edge in setting up the future order.
But isn't that a bit of a double edged sword? I mean, wouldn't such central planning also bring risks of its own, like overreach or stagnation in innovation, especially socially?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a very fair point. The argument isn't that one system is perfect, it's more about clarity of vision. While Western democracies are built on open competition and pluralism, there's currently an air of uncertainty. And Nair hints that China, despite its authoritarian leanings, may be more unified in its ideas about reforming or reshaping global order.
That's a striking contrast. It's like maybe the West is used to chaos and free debate, whereas China appears to be embracing a sort of streamlined front. Yet, wouldn't you say that free debate itself is a key component in evolving democracies?
I totally agree. There's definitely a trade off. One could argue that the West's very openness also makes it vulnerable when global challenges like climate crises or economic disruptions emerge all at once, making the old system struggle to adapt quickly.
That's fascinating. It almost feels like we're at a crossroads, where both models have inherent strengths and weaknesses. But let's step back. What's the basis of Nair's claim that China's vision is clearer?
Well, Nair outlines the scope of US China rivalry in a context where geopolitical stakes are astronomically high. He points out that these two nations, being the only ones with real global clout, are in a position to, shape the emerging world order. In the midst of what he describes as uncharted waters and the potential breakup of the old global order, he argues that China's centralized strategy offers a more coordinated long term plan compared to the often disjointed approach in the West.
When you put it that way, it certainly sounds like there is a narrative of control and preparedness in China's strategy, even though the mechanics of governance are vastly different from Western models of democracy.
Exactly. And if you think about it, they are not just playing a game of, well, competing powers. It's about envisaging the future. The video really hits on how the current chaos, these so called existential risks, might require a kind of leadership that isn't burdened by traditional democratic delays.
But isn't that a little bit alarming? I mean, centralizing power and reducing debate can lead historically to some serious issues with accountability, right?
Sure, that's a valid critique. I mean, there's always the risk of authoritarian overreach.
Yeah,
But Nair's argument, in a nutshell, is more about the strategic vision than endorsing any ideology as superior per se. It's almost like he wants US and Chinese elites to really understand each other better, not just as adversaries, but as pivotal actors shaping tomorrow's world.
that makes sense. It's like If both sides could really cut through their ideological differences and see what the other is planning, maybe they'd find some common ground in preventing catastrophe.
Precisely. And think about it, this isn't just academic. The stakes are global. When crises, be they financial, climate-related, or even geopolitical military tensions, threaten to upend peace and prosperity, understanding these different visions becomes absolutely crucial.
It sounds almost like an urgent call for dialogue, doesn't it? To me, that's one of the biggest takeaways, that US leaders and Chinese leaders too need to bridge this understanding gap.
Right. And the interesting twist is the question of democracy. The title itself is provocative. Is China more democratic than the West? It challenges us to rethink what democracy really means in a context where global order is being redefined.
Yes. So, in a way, Nair's using democracy, not in the traditional sense, but more as a measure of policy clarity and strategic cohesion.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And he points out that the West, often debating every nuance on every issue, might end up paralyzed in its decision-making processes. Meanwhile, China's approach, while less pluralistic, might allow for quicker, more decisive policy implementation on the big issues.
But here's a counterpoint. Don't you think that without debate, you risk marginalizing important voices? There's a risk of missing out on innovative solutions that come from diverse perspectives.
Certainly. And that is where the tension lies. I think Nair is well aware of that paradox. It's that delicate balance between speed and inclusivity, control and freedom. His argument seems less like praising one over the other, and more about urging both sides to learn from each other's strengths in these turbulent times.
Yep, it really does seem like a call for mutual understanding rather than a simple critique of one system over the other.
Absolutely. And consider this analogy. It's like two chefs making the same dish, but one follows a strict recipe while the other improvises on the fly. Both methods might yield a tasty result, but they come with very different levels of consistency and risk.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It definitely highlights that consistency and adaptability are both valuable, just in different contexts.
Exactly. And when we look at global leadership now, we see that the challenges require both a rock-solid plan and the ability to adapt rapidly. The Western system, with all its debates and checks and balances, might sometimes feel like it's moving slower in the face of immediate threats.
While on the other side, a more centralized model could be quicker, but might miss out on the benefits of multiple perspectives. It's a classic strategic trade-off.
Yes, and that's why the conversation isn't about declaring a winner. It's about understanding that as global conditions evolve and crises multiply, all nations, be it the US or China, will need to adapt aspects of each other's approaches to meet challenges effectively.
And it's interesting to note how Nair's perspective, coming from an Asian context, forces us to rethink our assumptions. Often Western discourse dominates these conversations, but here we get a refreshing, albeit challenging viewpoint.
Exactly, it's like a breath of fresh air in the debate. Nair opens up a dialogue where we have to consider that what we traditionally label as democracy might be too narrow a framework in a world that's shifting so much.
Right? This discussion reminds me that the future of global politics isn't destined to follow old paradigms, but rather be shaped by practical and sometimes surprising strategies.
And that's the heart of the matter. Global leadership is entering a phase where clarity of vision and decisive action might outweigh the traditional slow but sure democratic debate. This video really pushes that boundaries of thought.
Yep. So, if we had to wrap it up, do you think the Asian perspective presented here offers solutions, or does it simply highlight the growing rift between worldviews?
I'd say it does both. It presents a challenge to the conventional wisdom by showing that the current Western model, with all its inherent messiness, might be less effective in today's rapid-fire global environment. At the same time, it warns us that adopting a more controlled, almost centralized strategy isn't without risking the very freedoms many value.
And in that sense, this dialogue is an invitation for leaders and thinkers alike to reimagine democracy and governance, putting aside old binaries to tackle the urgent challenges ahead.
Exactly. It's an invitation for all sides to engage in constructive introspection. When the stakes are as high as global peace and prosperity, every perspective matters, even the ones that challenge our traditional definitions.
Yeah, well, that definitely gives us a lot to chew on. This kind of conversation is essential as we navigate a future that's very much in flux.
Absolutely. And so, as we wrap up, remember that understanding isn't about accepting one narrative over another. It's about drawing lessons from all approaches to build a more resilient and unified future.
Couldn't have put it better. Thanks for diving deep into these ideas. It's been an eye opener.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone listening. Keep questioning and keep exploring these big ideas as our world keeps evolving.